We have here a 2002 Volkswagen Jetta with a 1.9 liter TDI ALH engine. And there's another video on this one coming. This car came in as a no start condition. And the first thing I do when there's a no start condition on this generation is to prime the injection pump and bleed the injectors, because obviously a diesel needs a good fuel supply in order to run. So I'm doing this video separately of that one in order to demonstrate a process that we do here all the time. Now this process could be the same on almost any 99 to 2003 Volkswagen TDI, some 98 Beetles and 98.5 Jettas and Golfs also. If you're working on an older TDI with a 1Z or AHU from 96 and up, process would be identical also. And you could probably adapt this process from any Volkswagen diesel from 76 on up. Now there's various different ways of doing this. I'm going to show you my way, which is quick and easy for a shop like me, but you may not have the tools that I have. So I'm going to show you a couple different options you can use. To start with, understand that priming the injection pump is completely different than bleeding the injectors. They are two separate processes, but you almost always need to do them together. If you have a diesel fuel leak, especially the injection pump ends up empty, and it will not open the injectors by pushing air at them. It has to push diesel fuel to them in order for hydraulic pressure to build to open the injectors. After you have an injection pump that's full, if there's air in the lines between the injection pump and the injectors, then the injection pump will simply compress that air, and then the air will expand when the injection pump's not pushing fuel towards that injector. And same thing goes again. It'll just simply compress the air and it'll expand each time the injection pump tries to fire that injector. So you have to get that air out, because air pressure will never open the injectors. So so after you prime the injection pump, you have to get the air out of the lines and the injectors. You have to bleed the injectors. And I'm going to show both those processes. If you do not prime the fuel filter after a fuel filter change, the air will go into the injection pump after you start the car, and then the car will die. At that point, you will need to prime the injection pump and bleed the injectors. Anytime you work on the fuel system, you might need to do this process. For instance, if you change an engine, you're probably going to need to do this process. If you change an injection pump, you're going to need to do this process. If you reseal the injection pump, you're going to need to do this. And anytime the engine won't start, you'll need to do this. Bleeding the injectors is a good test for whether or not it's getting fuel, and I'll show you that once we have primed this one up. Okay, whenever I prime the injection pump, I take it loose right here. You would think you could prime it right here, but there's stuff inside there. Maybe it's a one-way check valve, but it will not draw vacuum through there very easily. I'm sure people have done it, but I just find it so much easier just to take this out. So bust this loose. And unfortunately, this one I'm going to need to counter hold. Don't lose the washer. This is the tool that we normally use to prime an injection pump. This is the Harbor Freight oil extractor tool, and it uses shop air in order to make a vacuum. Usually you would use that to suck oil out of something, like a topside oil change, or just suck oil out of whatever you needed to suck. But the point is that it makes vacuum. This is the end of our hose, and we got this rubber fitting that came in our Mighty Back kit, and it just happens to fit the injection pump hole perfectly. If you don't have this fitting, you can use just any type of rubber hose that you can seat up against there to make it seal. So we put that on there and let it suck until we get a steady stream of fuel coming out of the injection pump, indicating that the injection pump is full of diesel. And my hose is very clear, but I can see I am getting a steady stream of fuel out of it. Then you put your washer back on. And so that there is how you prime the injection pump. Now if you don't have a Harbor Freight oil extractor, but you own one of these cars, you might want to buy one, because doing topside oil changes is very easy. You can change the oil filter right there and just simply suck the oil out of the dipstick tube, and you can do just fine of a job. We don't do that for customers' cars, but I do it on my own car, and it's much easier oil change. You don't have to jack up the car, and you don't have to worry about strip drain plugs, and it's nice to get underneath the car every time and make sure the ball joints are okay, the tie rods are okay, there's no oil leaks, stuff like that. But when you just want to get the oil changed and get it done and out the door, on my own car, I think that's a wonderful way to go. But maybe you have a tool like this, a Mighty Vac handheld vacuum pump. And if you have a tool like this, you use the reservoir because you don't want diesel fuel to go into the pump. And using the reservoir, you can do the same thing. Hold that right in there, prop the reservoir someplace safe, and then go to town on the handheld vacuum pump. I have to say I have never done this, not even one time, because it's a lot of work. So before I had the oil extractor, I would use my AC vacuum pump. Some adapters on it to where I can just hook hoses to it and apply that vacuum to the reservoir and suck it the same way I just showed with the handheld vacuum pump. I find this really useful. I don't use this on AC ever because I have an AC machine, and the AC machine does the job of that. I haven't used this on a car in 5 to 7 years probably, but I use it all the time for other testing. You may have seen it in another video where I tested the N249 solenoid. You can find a link to that video in the description and in the area of the cards up in here. I assume most do-it-yourselfers don't have an AC vacuum pump that they can use for this, but if you have a shop vac, you can do the same thing with some type of reservoir like this. You don't have to have one of these either. When I started in this business, we had a pickle jar that we modified to be a vacuum reservoir, and we would use it to suck oil out of the stuff. Like if we overfilled a transmission or something, we'd suck a little bit of oil out of it. And it wasn't made out of glass. We dropped it every once in a while, but we had a lot of pickles, so it wasn't a problem because we always had a replacement jar. But I think the easiest way for a do-it-yourself to prime the injection pump is to take this hose off here and pay attention to this. This is my favorite trick here. You grab the hose with needle nose and you use it as a lever to pry it off. And that works really, really well. All you need to do is hook a hose to here, stick a funnel inside the hose. You probably should take this off right here so that the air can come out of it while you fill it with diesel fuel. And that's probably the easiest way for a do-it-yourselfer to prime the injection pump. Okay, after you prime the injection pump, or any time that there's air introduced into the injector lines, you want to loosen these up and then crank the engine over. Now if you were doing this as a test for a no-start vehicle, you'd want to pay attention to how high the fuel shoots out. If the fuel just barely dribbles out or just comes out about an inch or so, that ain't good enough. That ain't going to be enough pressure to open the injectors. You want 6 to 10 inches of fuel in order to know that all the processes are working for the injection pump to inject fuel. I'm going to crank the engine over to get the air out of it. Pay attention to the fuel shooting out. Okay, I was watching that through the area of the wipers in the hood, and I could see fuel squirting up pretty high. So that is what a good test looks like. We'll close these off. The engine, of course, isn't going to start when these are loose because the fuel pressure just goes to the atmosphere, and there is no fuel pressure inside the injector to open the injector. This is quite messy. You could put some shop towels around here and stuff to try and catch it, but when I'm doing a test, I want to be able to see that the fuel is actually shooting up. So I don't know how practical that is for me here. And the car should start up. I shut the car off so that you can hear me speak. Sometimes after you start the car, after bleeding the injectors, there's a wee bit of air left in one or two of them. And it'll kind of stumble and misfire because that injector ain't opening all the way. Or maybe it isn't opening at all. So as it's running, there's a small process that you can do to bleed out any remaining air. And I'm going to show you that now. On this type of engine, you can also use this test as a cylinder contribution test. What that means is that you open each injector to see if that cylinder is running good. If you open the injector and there is no RPM drop in the engine, then you can tell that cylinder isn't contributing. This is the final process in bleeding the injectors. It's also how I would do a cylinder contribution test on this engine. Put your safety squints on while you're doing this. Okay, never, never, never do this type of test or try and bleed the injectors on a common rail Volkswagen diesel 2009 and up. That's in America. I don't know what years have what in Europe or in the rest of the world. So in America, if it's 2000 and up, it's a common rail diesel and the pressures are dangerous. You do not want to open those while the engine's running, ever. Okay, a quick cleanup of the mess. This stuff is flammable. Don't spray it on a hot engine. Definitely don't breathe the fumes when you are spraying it on anything that's hot. If you want to financially contribute to the continued production of these videos, find the donate icon on my website at www.kansascitytdi.com. And if you learned anything from this video, click like and subscribe.